Hi, this is David with EV World News, where we talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock market. Here today, I've got special guest engineer Mike Herzog. He's been with us before. How you doing today, Mike? Can you hear me okay, Mike?
Great. How have you been? How have you been?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Yeah, I'm coming. You're coming through okay. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you're loud and clear. All right. So first of all, I want to talk. We have this interesting article from Stanford Research, and this seems like it should be something that should be, you know, a fairly good source, you think, but they're talking about how it's not safe to be charging your electric vehicles overnight. And according to this recent research by Stanford University's, most EV owners tend to charge their vehicles at home during the evening or overnight, leading to significant costs for the electricity grid. They suggest a shift towards daytime charging at public charging stations or workplaces rather than at home. What do you think about that, Mike?
Well, it's kind of interesting because it's contrary to what we've heard before, and what you've looked at. It's, hey, we want to shift these things overnight. So there's perspectives you have to look at when you're approaching data like that. And one, obviously, there's regional differences in the power grids. So
Right.
I think the approach they were taking, and most of their research was focused on the West Coast. So ideally, what you want to do with electric vehicle load, you want to fill in the valleys where you have the load. So you have your load curve, it goes up, it goes down. You have generation curves where you have high solar that creates the duck curve where you do have those valleys during the day, and push those up. So I can see that potentially in a West Coast scenario where it's, hey, this is the low point of load on our day. They're heavily invested in solar, in that area, so it would make sense. You want to line up that load to where the solar is available. Now, where we're at in the Midwest, that's not necessarily the case. We have higher loads during the day. Our primary source of renewables is wind, which tends to blow in the evenings and overnight hours, when there isn't a lot of load, and drive those prices. So it's a provocative title, and kind of a provocative study, because it is a little bit contrary to what we've seen before. But I think the important thing is understanding that there isn't this one size fits all. We have different climates, we have different resources available, we have different loading patterns, we have all of these different things that are impacting the grid. So the Stanford results coming out, it's sure, that may be true for West Coast, and what that looks like. But it's important for everybody to understand it's not necessarily going to be applicable across the entire United States.
What was kind of interesting is they're talking about what kind of a strain it could put on the grid by 2035. And so we're talking 12 years from now. Bill and I did a talk last week where we were talking about if you simply replaced all of your hot water heaters. Now, this was electric hot water heaters with heat pump hot water heaters, which would save more energy than you would use if you drove 10,000 miles a year in an EV. That it would actually save more electricity. And that seemed like a pretty simple alteration. One of the things with a lot of this is trying to alter people's habits. In the United States, Bill's real big on e-bikes and all that. I have a hard time seeing us turn into a European city that looks, that way. I think it's a little easier to get people to focus on four-wheeled vehicles and getting used to that. But the Stanford study goes on to talk about how nighttime charging could lead to a 25% increase in peak electric demand within a little over a decade. And I think there's some truth to that. I do know that when we talked about this before, California has a mismatch of when renewables are available versus when peak demand is. And everybody doesn't have the ability to necessarily have their car at home charging during the day, during sunlight, or whatever. Their big fear is everybody's going to power from 0 miles to 300 miles on their EV every night between 5 and 7 when everybody's hitting the grid. So it's a little
It is, and that's where there is validity to that. And one of the baseline assumptions going into all of this is there's no type of control strategy, and it's just whenever people want to charge, whenever they're able to charge, just plug in, and the grid has to be built for it. But similar to what you were saying, habits that people have, this is one space where there aren't bad habits yet, or people haven't built those. You can think about your cell phone of, hey, this is an easy one. There are some people who mine's plugged in right now looking at it. When I'm not using it, I keep it plugged in. There's some people who feel more comfortable without doing that. So you can think about, is your habit when you get home, do you plug your cell phone in,
Right.
immediately, or is it you feel comfortable letting it ride a little bit? So that's some of that space where we can shape habits in the EV space before we build them, because it isn't as prevalent as it used to be. Now, getting that infrastructure to office places, to public charging stations, to everywhere else, and that's part of the EV rollout. You need to make these spaces available and consistently available to folks as they're not in their home, and they feel more comfortable taking it out into a space like that. So all of that's going hand in hand. But this idea of unmitigated charging, creating these spikes and peaks and everything like that overnight is true. And I mean, that's the fear. That's the fear we have from the electric industry, is everybody's just going to plug in unmitigated. And people plug in at 5 o'clock, people plug in at 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock, depending on how their day shapes out. And when we see those increases, that's where it is. But you also have this ability where people don't drive 300 miles a day. So it's been very interesting of how that is, and how you can potentially overnight shift some of those patterns and almost have different charging blocks. Yeah.
Well, I think that's always going to be a issue with, the charging. But I think one of the things is, as we've seen, the EV world is still kind of a new frontier, especially in the United States, when we only have 7% of new car sales are electric vehicles. And so as we keep going along that path, to see more changes in how people are able to, and people and public utilities are able to provide energy, to make that work out. But it was interesting. The whole article was basically just talking about, in terms of the grid. And we all know California has grid issues to start with. So that, and one of their problems is that the population keeps going up faster than they have infrastructure for. But they have the issue where they have so much solar available already, the grid can't take all of the solar that's available during the daytime. And I understand that some states too don't let you sell your solar back to the grid. So there's issues with. Nebraska is one of the states that's friendly in that regard. Texas is, California, a lot of states are, but there's some states that don't allow you to push back to the grid yet. So it really hurts their adoption of solar in those states. So eventually there's going to have to be some changes in regulations and how the different utilities adopt that. And we don't even have in the utilities, we've talked about this before, there's public, there's private utilities. And it can vary from town to town, and how every town is going to accept renewable energy in terms of making that available for people's needs. What is the real cost of electricity when we're paying per the kilowatt? I do know that it's possible to buy solar energy for mining, like Bitcoin and stuff like that, for like 3.5 cents a kilowatt. Well, the thing is, though, you're mining it right where the farm is, right where the solar farm is. And so that's different than having to transmit it, 100 miles to the city that needs the energy. And that's one of the main reasons why you're paying 15 cents, 17 cents a kilowatt for electricity is transmission costs, not the actual generating electricity, So
there's a lot of congestion in our grids as they go through, and that's been one of the challenges really facing the grid over the past few years, and even going back 20 years ago from when wind really started to become prevalent in large wind farms in there. And it's the amount of transmission work and redundancy and careful calculation, to make sure the grid doesn't collapse as a result of these intermittent resources and everything. And I know that's a common knock against renewables. Of their intermittency, and is it constant, and they're providing the right type of inertia, and all of these things that get very, very complicated in the grid in a hurry. So it's, people have taken, engineers, in my field, really take the time to understand what that means, how these things can go in, and how we can keep the grid stable, and continue to add those in. And they said it's unfortunately where, renewables take space. Wind farms take space. Solar facilities take space. And typically where there is space, it's not desirable for development, commercial, residential, industrial, other types of development. So land is cheap, and that's not near cities. That's not near places. There's here in the Midwest, there's a lot of concerns with solar and cutting into agriculture zone spaces, and areas around that. And wind was a little bit different, where your towers have kind of this fixed base, and people can farm right up to the base of it, and you're not actually losing that much farmable land. Whereas solar, it's acres and acres and acres that these areas take to kind of fill that up. So that's one of the concerns out there too, of just where you can put these, where there is space to put these, or far away from loads in areas like that. So that's contributing to it too, of just things are far away, and we have to build the infrastructure to keep those things up.
Hey, they can put all kinds of power in the Omaha area on the other side of that ridge in Sarpy County, where you can't run sewer over the ridge.
Yeah. Yep.
No. So,
exactly.
I've got one other article I want to cover today, and this one's kind of funny. This one, instead of being about the grid, this one's about keeping the world from burning from EVs. So, anyways, let's see here. Who has put a stop to the electric vehicle revolution before someone gets hurt? And this article is talking about all the fires with electric vehicles, and a lot of these tend to have originally been like the original, like Nissan Leafs and some of the Chevy Bolts, some of the early ones. But the other thing is the cheap electric bicycles have had their issues, but they keep wanting to talk about Teslas catching on fire. Somebody even posted a video of an EV with a small bonfire, and this was actually made as kind of a gag, the Tesla holiday version with a built-in fireplace. So some of this gets a little ridiculous, because there's been a couple cases. There was a ship that caught on fire back in 2022, the Felicity Ace, and it did have EVs on fire and the boat sank. But there was another one that they assumed it was, and it turned out it didn't have EVs catch on fire. There were a few that were smoke damaged, but it was something else that had caught on. And this is kind of interesting. So apparently at the Luton airport, 125 flights were canceled after a huge fire, which started on the third floor of a multi-story car park, causing a 20 million pound structure or 20 million British pounds currency structure to collapse. 1,500 vehicles were destroyed. Oh, that's pretty amazing. It's believed diesel vehicle, according to authorities, but one witness claims that it was very likely a Range Rover Evoque. Interesting. So who knows? So they're not even necessarily saying that this was even caused necessarily by an EV. Could have been, but what part of this story is trying to claim is that there's a cover-up. That they think people are covering up EV fires. And let's see, EV and an e-bike left charging caused a house fire, which that's not surprising. It's just, it's kind of.
Well, it's the all I can say about that. There's a couple of things. One, if you do add infrastructure to your home, if you do anything, hire an electrician, hire somebody who's licensed by a reputable brand. If you go online to the dregs of the internet and order something dirt cheap from overseas, well, that's a risk of anything you buy dirt cheap from overseas, that it's manufactured poorly using substandard materials. But use a reputable source, hire an electrician. That's true for anything you do in your house. Hire an electrician, hire somebody who's licensed that actually knows what they're doing to connect. And, I recently had the larger outlet put in my garage to charge my EV to put a station, and they opened up the box on the charger and, made sure what they were installing matched the specs on that, and put, I'm an electrical engineer, but I'm not licensed. I'm not a licensed electrician. So I left that to the professionals. Like, you guys know how to do this, put it in there and tell me make sure this is going to work. So that's one of them. I've also done a handful or I'm familiar with battery integration in the grid. So like bulk energy storage with that, where it goes. And I will say it is a big topic to come through. And as you start to put these in areas in jurisdictions where they maybe haven't seen this before, talking to the fire department is part of it, and just saying, hey, obviously there's a high risk and a high level of danger in the substations and fenced in facilities where water and electricity do not want to mix. Now you add in the potential for a chemical fire from batteries. So, but it's all just awareness, and it's all just conversation. Let them know this is here. There's a procedure. There is fire suppression installed in all of these systems.
Substandard.
Yeah. Yep.
So, it's everything from the cheap Chinese e-bikes. And to be fair, some of the original EV batteries just weren't quite the same. I mean, you fly on a plane, you can't have any lithium batteries from, you have to have your laptops and your phones. You have to have them in the cabin. You're not allowed to transport any lithium batteries in the cargo hold. I think eventually we're going to see some move away from lithium. I think at some point, we'll see some different materials going in these solid state batteries. And so we're not going to be dealing with quite the same issues. What do
I think so.
I don't know how much information you've seen on batteries, but I keep seeing more and more information about solid state batteries being the future, because they can hold more energy for the size and weight of the battery. And so you can definitely have, more power output for a car. It's just a matter of when they start becoming cost effective, because like the 100 kilowatt batteries in a lot of Teslas are worth like $18,000 approximately, in cost. And it's like, well, if we're going to all of a sudden make that a $50,000 battery, you start adding a lot more, cost to the car. Yeah. So, that's a big part of it. Anyways, those are just those two stories I kind of wanted to cover with you today, because especially having an engineer on here to talk and get your expertise on here. Yeah. And anything.
But no, they're both very, very good. I like the Stanford article quite a bit, because where you first see it and you want to go, hey, no, nobody's been saying that for a long time, but they're actually matching demand to generation, matching the load to generation, which is a great thing. And starting to see that and make improvements in that space.
Well, one of the things I've seen in this space, and this is true of any kind of news, people like to watch the world burn. And if everything's working fine, it isn't very newsworthy.
Yeah. It's boring, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's boring.
If it bleeds, it bleeds.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it makes for better news if we could talk about what's wrong with everything. And there's no question there's going to be challenges to making electric vehicles work. I tell people all the time, it's like, look, they're going to be cheaper. They're going to be cheaper to operate, cheaper to own. They're going to simplify your life. They're eventually going to be safer. Elon Musk has talked about the fact that with the tech they have in the Teslas, that eventually you won't need all these crash safety things, because cars will stop crashing. And, the cars are going to communicate with each other. Hey, eventually, we won't have car crashes anymore. So I think that, they'll be able to make cars a little bit lighter and cheaper, and, and affordable. On the current, path we're on now in the United States, is going to be tough. And I'm also worried that the big three automakers aren't going to make it through the EV revolution. And, if they stick just to what they're doing, and I realize they've got to cater to American consumers, but I think, I'm not saying that they can make that happen. Everything has to be market driven, right? And so it's a matter of It's just like when they first invented the car, you had to have roads to drive it on, right? They had to
Yep.
make roads that worked
Yep.
for the cars. And I think we're kind of in the same pathway now, that we've got to make things ready for, electric vehicles and that transition. But anyways, that's all I have
Yeah,
to cover
it's just
for today.
that sounds great. Yeah, it's time, and I know nobody wants to hear that answer, and it takes time to change. It takes time, money, and effort, to make these things happen. And we're on the curve. We're on the adoption curve finally. After a long time, it's starting to take off, but it's going to be some time.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening in today. Make sure to like and